It's one of those images that just really sticks in your head, right?
Mhm.
Someone throwing a shoe. At a world leader, no less.
Yeah.
We saw it happen recently with President William Ruto in Kenya, but well, it's definitely not the first time.
Not at all.
So today on the deep dive, we're going to really unpack that, look at why this happens. We'll cover the Kenya incident, of course, but also that, well, almost iconic shoeing of George W. Bush back in Iraq.
Exactly. And we've got some really interesting material to look at. Um, Obviously, the news reports on Ruto, but also lots of detail on the Bush incident, some from Wikipedia, actually.
Okay.
Plus, there are these broader lists, tracking shoe throwing incidents around the world. One from the Kenya Times focuses just on leaders who've been hit.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and we even looked at a TikTok discussion about the Ruto event just to get a feel for like the immediate public chat around it.
Right.
And then to kind of frame it all, we've got this Amnesty International toolkit on nonviolent direct action. It helps contextualize these acts maybe as a form of protest.
Okay, so the mission today isn't just to list these off. We want to dig into the context, the motivation behind them, what happened afterwards,
Right.
and maybe what it tells us about protest, security, that whole dynamic.
Yeah, the relationship between leaders and the public.
Okay, so let's dive in. Let's start with probably the most famous one, George W. Bush, Baghdad, December 14, 2008, Muntadhar al-Zaidi.
Yeah, that moment. It's pretty striking, not just the act itself, throwing the shoes, but what he apparently yelled.
What was it again?
According to reports, as he threw the first shoe, he shouted in Arabic, "This is a farewell kiss from the Iraqi people, dog."
Wow. I mean, farewell kiss and dog in the same sentence? That's intense.
It really is. It just captures so much raw feeling, doesn't it, about how he and maybe others felt.
And you can picture the scene, right? The press conference. Bush actually ducked pretty well, didn't he?
He did. He dodged both of them. Apparently, Prime Minister al-Maliki even tried to, bat one away.
Ah, really? But the aftermath wasn't funny. Al-Zaidi was tackled immediately.
Oh, yeah. Subdued right away. And kind of a weird side note. The White House press secretary at the time, Dana Perino, she got hit in the eye by a microphone boom in the commotion.
Ouch. Just chaos.
Total chaos. And, the timing is important here. Bush was leaving office soon.
Right.
This trip was meant to be like a victory lap almost, celebrating these new security agreements, the Strategic Framework Agreement, Status of Forces Agreement.
Those were the deals setting the timeline for U.S. troops to leave Iraq, replacing the UN mandate.
Exactly. So a really significant politically charged moment for al-Zaidi to choose.
So what happened to him right after the arrest?
Well, he was arrested by the Prime Minister's security, then handed over to the Iraqi army, then the courts. But there were actually quite a few protests in Iraq calling for him to be released. Shows how divided people were.
Sure. And legally, what was he facing?
Initially, the charges looked like insulting a foreign leader and the Iraqi PM. That could mean up to 2 years, maybe just a fine. But there was also this other factor. He kind of instantly became this folk hero figure in parts of the Arab world, a symbol of defiance that probably played into how things unfolded.
Right, that complicates the legal side.
Yeah.
Did other countries or organizations get involved?
They did. Amnesty International called for an investigation because there were claims he'd been mistreated in custody. And Reporters Without Borders, while they didn't exactly endorse shoe throwing as journalism,
No, probably not.
they did express concern about his arrest and called for leniency. They even sort of pointed out that Bush himself seemed pretty relaxed about it, almost brushing it off.
Yeah, his reaction was surprisingly calm on camera. It raises that whole question, though, where is the line between protest and assault, especially when it's symbolic like this?
It's a really tough question, and the legal process reflected that ambiguity.
How so?
Well, al-Zaidi apparently admitted to aggression against a president, but the big legal fight was whether that counted as actual assault under Iraqi law, which could mean 15 years.
Wow, 15.
Yeah, versus the much lesser charge of just insulting a leader, which was more like 3 years max.
Okay, big difference. So what did they decide?
In the end, March 2009, he got 3 years for assaulting a foreign head of state.
3 years. But I feel like he didn't serve that long.
You're right, he didn't. His lawyers appealed, and in April, so just a month later, it was reduced to 1 year.
Why the reduction?
They cited his age, he was relatively young, and the fact he had no criminal history.
Makes sense.
And then he was actually released even earlier, September 2009, after about 9 months total. Good behavior.
9 months for throwing shoes at the U.S. president in Iraq. Still kind of amazing. And he really did become a symbol, didn't he? I remember hearing polls showed many Iraqis supported him.
Yeah, there was a poll suggesting something like 62% of Iraqis saw him as a hero after that. And
Wow.
after he got out, he talked about starting a humanitarian foundation, focusing on orphans and medical centers, trying to use that notoriety for something positive, it seemed.
Did that ever happen?
I'm not entirely sure how far those specific plans got, but he definitely stayed vocal.
Yeah, he wasn't exactly quiet about his views on the U.S. afterwards, even with Obama taking over.
Not at all.
Yeah.
He had that really blunt quote, didn't he? Something like, "Away goes a white dog and along comes a black dog. They are the same except for the color."
Oof. Yeah, pretty clear he saw continuity in U.S. policy.
Very clear. And he even tried to get into politics later, ran for the Iraqi parliament in 2018.
Really?
Yeah, his platform was very critical of both U.S. and Iranian influence in Iraq. He didn't win, though.
So, the Bush shooing, hugely symbolic, major consequences for al-Zaidi, really captured a moment. But as we said, it wasn't the last time we saw something like this.
Definitely not. That Wikipedia list we mentioned, it shows quite a few incidents happened after the Bush shooting. It's sort of maybe opened the floodgates, or at least put the idea out there more publicly.
Which brings us right up to date almost. May 4th, 2025. Kenyan President William Ruto, hit by a shoe during a public event.
Yeah, a much more recent example. And reports say 3 people were arrested pretty quickly after that one.
And that Nation Africa article framed it as a major security lapse, right? A wake-up call.
It did. It really highlighted the contrast between the extensive security protocols that are supposed to be in place and what actually happened.
It's fascinating reading about those protocols. Intelligence gathering, physical security, rapid response teams.
Reconnaissance, route planning, decoy cars and motorcades, close protection rings, screening crowds. It sounds incredibly thorough.
On paper, yeah. But the analysis in that piece suggested some potential failures in the Ruto incident.
Exactly. The expert they quoted pointed to maybe poor crowd screening, maybe a slow reaction time from the security detail,
The president being too close to an unscreened area of the crowd.
potential intelligence gaps, maybe no clear plan for getting the president out of there immediately if something happened, lots of potential weak points.
And it sounds like they're already talking about changes because of it.
Seems so. Things like maybe keeping a greater distance between the president and crowds in the future, using more plainclothes officers mixed in, stricter screening, more security drills, standard responses when something like this happens.
And that Kenya Times piece you mentioned earlier, the one listing leaders hit by shoes,
Yeah.
it framed these incidents as genuinely dangerous sometimes.
Yeah, it made the point that it's not just embarrassing, it can actually pose a threat to the leader's safety. And it specifically included President Ruto on that list now.
So besides Bush and Ruto, that Wikipedia list gives other examples.
Yeah.
Just to show this isn't only about, say, U.S. presidents or Kenyan politics.
Oh, yeah, it's quite global. Let me see. Pervez Musharraf, former leader of Pakistan, got shooed in London back in 2011. The protester was angry about Pakistanis being detained by the U.S.
Yep.
Hosni Mubarak in Egypt during the revolution there in 2011 faced protesters waving shoes at him. Symbolic again.
Right.
Fang Bingsing, known as the father of the Great Firewall in China, someone threw a shoe at him in Wuhan, also 2011. Pretty direct protest against internet censorship. Wow, okay.
Mahmoud Ahmadinejad in Iran, 2011 again,
Yeah.
apparently over unemployment benefits. When Jiabao, Chinese premier at the time, got a shoe thrown at him during a speech at Cambridge University in the UK in 2009.
Cambridge, okay.
Yeah, protesting Chinese policies.
Mhm.
Even John Howard, former Australian PM, had a shoe thrown at him post-election in 2009. And P. Chidambaram in India, 2009, overdropping Sikh leaders from election lists.
It's quite the list. Different countries, different issues, but the same tactic.
It really is. And you mentioned the cultural meaning earlier.
Yeah, the shoe itself is an insult in some places.
Exactly. That Telegraph article, referenced in the Bush Wikipedia entry, talks about that. In many Middle Eastern and South Asian cultures, the shoe, especially the sole, is seen as dirty.
Because it touches the ground.
Right. So showing someone the sole of your shoe is already a big insult. Throwing it at them, especially someone in authority, just amplifies that contempt, makes it a really potent, loaded gesture. So it's not just random object throwing. There's often a deeper layer of meaning there. Okay, let's shift gears slightly. How do we understand this as an act of protest? We have that Amnesty International toolkit on nonviolent direct action, or NVDA. Does shoe throwing fit in there?
Well, it's an interesting question. It's definitely unconventional. But you could potentially see it as a form of NVDA, maybe falling under what the toolkit might call a media stunt or a symbolic public action.
Meaning the main goal is visibility, getting attention.
Yeah, using a symbolic, often provocative action to get a message across and generate media coverage. It certainly does that.
What are the core ideas behind NVDA, according to Amnesty?
Well, the absolute bedrock is a commitment to nonviolence. That's non-negotiable.
Okay.
Then there's the idea that actions should be strategic, thought through, understanding the risks involved.
Which can be pretty high for the person throwing the shoe, as we saw with those 80.
Absolutely. And tied to that is the principle of taking responsibility for your actions. You do the act, you face the consequences.
It makes you think about the calculation, doesn't it? Maybe not much physical planning to throw a shoe, but the potential fallout, legal trouble, public reaction is huge. It's definitely high risk, high visibility.
It is. And the toolkit even touches on how organizations like Amnesty themselves sometimes debate different tactics. Things like civil disobedience or boycotts. Where do you draw the line? How do you balance challenging injustice with staying nonviolent and acting responsibly?
It's not always clear cut. And speaking of public reaction, we have that TikTok discussion about the Rudo incident.
Yeah.
What did that show?
It was really all over the place. You had some people speculating it was staged somehow, maybe to generate sympathy or something.
Huh. Interesting theory.
Others saw it as completely genuine, just raw frustration boiling over, and lots of debate about what it meant for the president's image, his popularity. It just shows how these things get chewed over and interpreted so differently, especially online, almost instantly.
Yeah, the digital echo chamber.
Yeah.
But underlying all this, even if it's a controversial method, is this connection to basic rights, isn't it? Freedom of expression, peaceful assembly.
You could argue that. I mean, it's definitely pushing the boundaries, and many would say crossing them into assault or endangerment. But the motivation often seems rooted in wanting to express dissent, wanting to be heard, wanting to hold power accountable in a very dramatic, unignorable way.
Right. So wrapping this up, what do we learn from this deep dive? It seems clear that shoe throwing, while pretty unusual, isn't just a random, bizarre act.
No, it's got history now. It's often highly symbolic, designed for maximum impact and visibility. And in some cultures, the act itself is deeply insulting.
And even though it might look impulsive, these moments carry real weight culturally, politically, and definitely for the security around leaders.
Absolutely. The security implications are huge.
So maybe the final thought for you listening is this. What does this specific act, throwing a shoe, tell us about how leaders and the public interact today? In all these different places, these different contexts? Is it just a moment of embarrassment for the target? Or is it actually a powerful, if really unconventional way people try to communicate deep dissatisfaction?
Yeah, and how do we balance that? The fundamental right people feel to protest versus the undeniable need to keep leaders safe. These incidents really put that tension into sharp focus, don't they?